Imaginary numbers show up whenever we have problems like this one. So for example, let's try to solve that one. What would I do first? Yep, you would get rid of the 1 by subtracting 1 on both sides. So I have x squared equals -1. And what do you think x has to be? We are going to square root both sides, but real quick, guys, is 1 squared -1? Is -1, is -1 times -1 -1? Okay, so right now there's not a number that we know of that will give a solution to this problem. Does that make sense? This is where imaginary numbers will come into play. So what we're going to have to do, since I know the answers aren't 1 or -1, we're going to take the square root of both sides. We'll have x equals. Now, we have an imaginary number here. This is where they come into play. The answer is I. So that's the definition of a imaginary number. Whenever you get square root of -1, we call that I. Square root of -1, we call it I. And this is useful whenever you have square roots of negative numbers. So a pure imaginary number is written in this format, BI, where B is a real number and I is the imaginary part. So for example, you could have 3I, you could have -3I, you can have 25I, you can have pi I, any real number with an I. That's an imaginary number. If you have an I, it's imaginary. Okay, let's talk about simplifying these radicals, these square root problems. So whenever you have square root of a negative number, we're going to write it as square root of -1 times the square root of 9. This one, we're going to write it as square root of -1 times the square root of 80. Now, let's recall our rule. Remember, I is what the square root of -1 is equal to. Whenever you see square root of -1, you put an I there, okay? So here, we have a square root of -1. So that means that's just I. What's the square root of 9? 3. So guys, you'll write your answer as 3I. Let's look at this one. We have square root of -1 again. That's just I. Let's break down the 80. Can y'all give me two numbers that give me 80? 8 times 10 is 80. Let's break down the 8. Yep, 4 times 2 is 8. Let's break down the 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Let's break down this 10. That can be 2 times 5. Okay, so I broke it down into its smallest parts. I have 4 2's, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, times a 5. Any pair that you have, cross it out. 1 goes outside. Cross out the other pair, goes outside. So I have 4 square root of 5. Don't forget, we had this I right here in the beginning. So I'm just going to slide an I in there. That's your answer. Okay, so let's try this one. We have -192. Remember, we're going to write this as -1, the square root of -1, times the square root of 192. Let's break down 192. Can y'all give me two numbers? Okay, hold on. What did you say? Okay, 16 times 12. Okay. And let's break down 16. What do y'all have? Okay, that's a pair. I'm just going to stop there. This can be 4 times 3. And let's break down the 4. That's 2 times 2. Okay, so I'm going to put all my stuff in here. 4 times 4 times 2 times 2 times 3. All right, so here's a pair of 4s, cross it out, it goes outside. Here's a pair of 2s, cross it out, it goes outside. So on the outside, I have 8. On the inside, I have square root of 3. And don't forget, what is the square root of negative 1? I. So I'm going to have an I. That's my answer. So now we're going to solve using square roots method. So first, I'm going to have to subtract 9 from both sides. I'm left with 2x squared equals negative 8. Now I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I have x squared equals negative 4. Now I'm going to use the square root method. Square root this side, square root cancels out with the squared, and I'm going to square root this side. So my answer will be, don't forget to put a plus or a minus sign first. Now we're going to apply what we just practiced. I'm going to rewrite square root of negative 4 as square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. What is the square root of negative 1? I. What's the square root of 4? 2. So that's your answer. Whenever you're solving, you need a plus or minus sign. Just let me remind you what we did last week. Say we had x squared equals 9. Can't x be 3? Because 3 squared is 9. Can't it also be negative 3? Because negative 3 times negative 3 gives you 9. Okay, so whenever you take the square root of both sides, you're going to always get a positive and a negative answer. So don't forget to put plus or minus. All right, let's try number 10. All right, so what do I do first? Yep, subtract 13. I'm going to have x squared equals negative 12. We're going to square root both sides. Whenever I square root both sides, I'm going to have a plus and a minus answer. Well, I have a negative under the square root symbol, so I already know I'm going to have I in my answer. Let's break down 12. That can be 4 times 3. This can be 2 times 2. So we have 2 times 2 times 3. That's a pair. So your answer is 2 square roots of 3. Don't forget the I. That's your answer. Okay, now we're going to look at powers of I. Anything to the power of 1 is just itself. And guys, looking at your notes, what did we say I is equal to? Negative. No, it's not just equal to negative 1. Square root of negative 1. That is I. Now let's look at I squared. Well, we know that I is the square root of negative 1, and then we're going to square it. Do you guys see what will cancel out? Yep, squared cancels out with the square root. So what is it equal to? Negative 1. So guys, I squared is equal to negative 1. Please box this, circle it, put a cloud around it because this is important. We're going to use this for the rest of these notes. I squared is equal to negative 1. We're going to use I squared for all of these. For example, for the next one, I have I cubed. That's just I squared times another I. That gives you 3 I's. I to the 4th, that's just I squared squared because 2 times 2 is 4. You guys see that? You can multiply exponents. An exponent raised to another exponent, you just multiply them. I to the 5th, that's just I squared. Squared is 4, right? I need another one though, so multiply it by another I. I to the 6th, we always start with an I squared. what can I multiply or what can I raise it to? If I square it, that's just 4. I want 6. Yep, so you're going to cube it. Good job. So I'm going to turn this into a 3. Next, I want I to the 7th power. We always start with I squared. Can you get me as close as possible to 7 cubed? And then I'm going to need another one to make it 7. Because 2 times 3 is just 6. I need another I to give me 7 I's. I to the 7th. Okay, let's try to the 8th. How am I going to write this? I squared to what? 4, because I want an 8. So 2 times 4 will give me the 8. So we use I squared for all of these. Okay, so now let's break it down so we know what these values are. So guys, remember, what is I squared equal to? -1. That's this big fact that we have to memorize. Okay, so this is -1 times I, which is just -I. Again, we have to use our fact. What is I squared again? So this is -1 squared. Well, what's -1 times -1? +1. Okay, let's move on to this one. What is I squared, guys? So that means I squared is just -1. What's -1 times -1? 1. And 1 times I is just I. Okay, now remember, I squared is just -1. What's -1 cubed? -1. That means I to the 6th power is -1. Okay, let's try it again. I squared is just -1. -1 cubed is -1 times I is -I. Let me show you a quick trick. When you have -1 to an even power, it's going to be 1. When you have -1 to an odd power, it's going to be -1. Please write that down. -1 in its even power, it's going to be 1. -1 to an odd power, it's going to be -1. You're going to want to memorize that. Okay. Remember, I squared is just -1. So this is -1 to the power of 4. And that's going to be even. 4 is even, so this is just 1. Let's do a harder one. What if I said I to the 100? Remember, you always start with I squared. What should I raise the 2 to? 50. 2 times 50 will give you the 100. Well, I squared is just -1. Is 50 even or odd? Even, so that's just 1. So always make it to the power of I to the power of 2, and that'll make this easier. So let's do another example. I have I to the 15th. This will be I squared. You always start with I squared. Can I get close to 15? What do I put? 7. 2 times 7 is 14. I just need another I to make it 15. Okay, well, this is -1, the power of 7. 7 is odd. Since this is odd, what will this become? -1 times I is just -I. So that's your answer. Okay, we always start with I squared. I want to get 76 or very close to 76. What should this power be? Good, 38. Because 2 times 38 is 76. I squared is just -1. Is 38 even or odd? It's even. So what will this whole thing become? 1. So that's the answer to this one.
So
Okay, so I to the 43. If we want to change this one, it'll be I squared. You want to get 43 or close to 43. So this will be what? 21. 2 times 21 is 42. So I need one extra I to make it 43. I squared is -1. 21, this is odd. That means this entire thing is -1. Then you have this times I, so you get -I. Okay, so now we're going to multiply. What's 4 times 7? 28. What's I times I? I squared. But what did we say I squared was? -1. 28 times -1 is -28. So that's your answer. So guys, this cubed goes to the 2 and the I. So what is 2 cubed? Okay, let's do that together then. This 3 goes to the 2 and the I, so it will look like this, times 5I. 2 to the power of 3. This means 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times another 2 is 8. So 2 cubed is 8. So let me write that. So 2 cubed, I get an 8. I cubed times 5I. Okay, let's multiply our numbers together. 8 times 5 is 40. What's I cubed times I? I to the 4th power. Now let's apply what we just learned. I to the 4th, I can write that as I squared to the power of 2. What's I squared? -1. So I squared is just -1. And guys, this is an even power. So this is just 1. 40 times 1 is just 40. So your answer is 40. All right. So guys, I have square root of -18. Remember, you have to write this as square root of -1 times the square root of 18. The 10, you have to rewrite this as square root of -1 times square root of 10. Okay, guys, remember, what's the square root of -1? I. So guys, that means this is just I square root of 18 times I square root of 10. Now the imaginaries will go together. I times I is I squared. And your square roots can go together. Square root of 18. What's times square root of 10? 180. I don't really have to write the 180 because we're going to split it up anyway. But 18 times 10 is 180, which we're going to write it as 18 times 10. Let's break down 18. Yep, 9 times 2. This can be 3 times 3. Okay, so we broke down the 18. Let's break down the 10. 2 times 5 is 10. So what this is we have I squared on the outside, and we're rewriting 180 to be, I have 3 and a 3 times 2 times 2 times a 5. Okay, so here's a pair of 3's, cross it out. Here's a pair of 2's, cross it out. So what I'm left with is 6I squared, and on the inside, square root of 5. Now remember, what did we say I squared was? -1, correct? So this is -6 square root of 5. Okay, so guys, I'm going to multiply all my numbers together. What's negative 4 times 2? Negative 8. What's negative 8 times negative 9? 72. Thank you. What is I times I times I? I cubed. Okay, so remember, we can write this as I squared times an I, right? Okay, and what is I squared? Okay, so this is negative 72I, since I squared is negative 1. I can also write it like this, 72 times a negative 1 times an I. Some of you guys were writing this, which is fine. Just don't write it like this because that looks like 72 minus I, not 72 times negative I. Okay? And you typically write it like this. Okay? So let's not write it this way. Okay. Another one. This squared goes to both items. So this is I squared and then square root of 3 squared. You guys see that this cancels out square root with the squared? So we're left with I squared times 3 for that first one. This squared goes to the negative 8. What's negative 8 times negative 8? 64. And I squared. So I'm just going to write that again. Okay, guys, what is I squared equal to? So this is negative 1 times 3 times 64 with the negative 1. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. 64 times negative 1 is also negative 64. And what are those two multiplied together? 100 what? 192. So that's your answer. Yep. Remember, guys, whenever you have negative square roots, we have to rewrite them as square root of negative 1 times square root of 24. Square root of negative 1 times square root of 3. Square root of negative 1 times square root of 2. Guys, what's the square root of all these negative 1s? I. So this is actually I square root of 24. I square root of 3 times I square root of 2. Now let's combine the i's. What's I times I times I? I cubed. Let's combine the square roots. What's 24 times 3 times 2? 144. Okay, let's continue to break this down. What's the square root of 144? 12. Okay, and then we have this I cubed. Remember, we can write this as I squared times an I. I squared is just negative 1 times I. So this is just negative I. Negative I. That's your answer.